I've had a number of people ask me, what do I do to load for a Wild Cat cartridge? What do I do as far as powder charges go? How do I do this? Well, it's really pretty simple. All the bullet makers publish, sell loading manuals. If you've got a Wild Cat cartridge, the very simplest thing for you to do is check the capacity of that case. What do I do to check the capacity of the case? I use a fairly dense ball powder to check that case capacity. One of the best things for you to use would be like Winchester 760 ball powder. Fill that Wild Cat case that there's no load data for up to the neck with powder. Dump that powder charge in the pan on a scale and weigh that powder charge. Once you've done that, write it down. There's a lot of loading data for our standardized cartridges. There's no doubt a cartridge that has a capacity that's very, very close to that Wild Cat cartridge. Let's say, for instance, that there's no load data for a 25-06 Ackley improved, but there's load data for a 25-06. Take the Winchester 760 powder, fill that case up to the neck, and see what the difference is. You got like around 4 or 5 grains difference in powder capacity. 25-06 Ackley improved over the standard 25-06. I'm talking about a standard cartridge, but I'm still using it as a comparison, and I'm showing you that you can use this, and it bears out what I'm trying to tell you by checking the capacity of the case. Once you've determined that, pick a bullet weight that you want to use. Look at the powders that are listed in your loading manual. Invariably, the slower burning powders for a given cartridge, and in this instance, the 25-06, which is, we're trying to find a load for 25-06 Ackley improved, we go to the densest charges. In other words, something around 7828 is going to give you the highest velocities in a 25-06. Let's say that the loading manual lists 56 grains of 7828 with 110 grain Nosler AccuBond in a 25-06. Well, you want to shoot that bullet in your 25-06 Ackley improved, and by the way, it's a tremendous bullet. It's tremendously accurate, and it does a tremendous job killing deer, size game, sheep, antelope, deer, and so forth. Anyway, you know that the manual lists 56 grains as a maximum charge. You've got this improved case, according to the charge that you filled that improved case with, about 4 more grains capacity, for instance. Well, you know that you can up the charge. I would simply load about 1 more grain than the maximum listed charge than the book. I'd shoot that load. I'd shoot that load and I would chronograph it. I would see how close my velocity variations were. And along with that, as I've explained previously, to do a loading, we all need to be using a 1-inch micrometer. A 1-inch micrometer to measure the case head of the fired case. And what we do here, I happen to have in my hand, it's a belted case, but the theory is still the same. And the measurement is still taken in the same place on the belted case as it is an unbelted case. So what we want to do before we fired those cases, in the improved chamber. We need to measure the cases to see what the case head measures. And you use this 1-inch micrometer and you measure right here, just on the edge of where the extractor groove is machined into the head of the case. You write that dimension down. You fire it around in the improved chamber with a grain more case. You've got cases that have properly fire formed with a little bit lower load for the particular 25-watt 6-axle improved. You've got no expansion here on the head. That tells you that you can go up in your powder charge. I work up a half a grain at a time, and I'll work my load up a half a grain at a time until, with my micrometer reading, I get a 1/2 thousandths of expansion here on the case. Let's say that case measured the 25-watt 6-axle improved case measured 466. I went up a half a grain, it stayed the same. I went up another half a grain, another half of a grain, perhaps another half of a grain. Finally, I got a little bit of expansion. I picked up, say, about 3/10 thousandths of an inch of expansion on the head of this case, measuring it with my micrometer. Well, I feel that a 1/2 thousandths case head expansion is permissible, and you can probably reload that case 10 or 15 times with a load that the case head only expands a 1/2 thousand. And we just measured, it was 3/10. Well, we can probably go up about another 1/2 grain, but that's probably absolutely all. We go up a 1/2 grain, yeah, it's exactly a 1/2 thousand expansion. At the same time we're chronographing our load and we're paying attention to our velocity variation. Say that we've got a tight velocity variation, we've got a tight group, we've got 3 bullets, that are inside of a 1/2 inch at 100 yards. Well, we're pretty well there. The only thing really left to do is maybe change the primer, change that bullet seating depth just a little bit, maybe a little 10 thousandths deeper, 10 thousandths longer, to see if we can actually tighten that group up by going to another primer or the bullet seating depth. We've got what we feel is pretty much the powder charge. Say we switch the primer, we pick up a little bit more expansion. Well, you went just a little bit too far with the load with that primer. It worked with the previous primer. Go back to the primer you used before, probably, if things haven't improved. And you can do this with almost any cartridge. You can design a cartridge yourself. I've designed about 7 different cartridges over my lifetime, things that I shoot, things that I built rifles for people. I build a lot of rifles in odd, not off-the-shelf Wild Cat chamberings, improved chamberings, and so forth. It's nothing for me to work up these loads. I've done these things so many times, but it's also very easy for the average hand loader to load for a Wild Cat cartridge. And you just simply follow those guidelines, figure out what the case capacity is, compare it to something that's known, and knowing loading data, compare maybe several manuals for loading data, and see what they say. They both say, well, about 56 grains is, a maximum with a given bullet weight or whatever it might happen to be with a particular powder. Go ahead and run with that. But at the same time, using this micrometer, because this gives you pressure reading, your chronograph gives you the velocity readings and the close velocity readings that you're looking for accuracy. If you've got, for instance, a standard deviation in the single digits, and you've been able to repeat that 3 or 4 times, you've got a pretty good load. Any load that's down in the single digits is probably going to perform fairly well. But if you've got a load that's up there around 20 standard deviation, 30, 40, 50, 60 standard deviation, like a lot of our factory ammunition that you'll buy and shoot in our, standardized calibers, most of that ammunition won't have a very close standard deviation, and the accuracy won't be there. Especially won't be there as you get a little further down range. Once I work up a load at 100 yards, I'll move to 300 yards and I'll verify that load and see if it's still shooting up to the potential that I think that it needs to be what I'm looking for. If I'm shooting a ½ inch at 100, I certainly want to shoot inside an inch and a half at 300, provided I've got good optics and I've properly benched that rifle. And if it's not shooting out there at that distance, you probably need to change a few things. And it may be the seating depth. There again, it may be the primer. You might need to change bullets. Maybe you need to try another brand of bullet, a different bullet weight, until you get that load that works with your cartridge. And there's no easier way to determine what you can load in one of these cartridges. Maybe you don't even know what it is. Maybe you've inherited a rifle that's chambered for something or other. You've determined what the caliber is, and you've been able, you maybe also inherited some ammunition or some cases or one thing or another. Well, I wouldn't particularly go with what might have been loaded in that ammunition, especially if you inherited it. I think that I'd do a little bit of checking to see that everything worked right. But there's a lot of situations where we've got to determine these things without really any information for that specific round. But there's still information for something. There are so many cartridges in so many different calibers that have got to be very, very close to what you've got. You can come within just, a few grains probably, capacity-wise, to determine where to load. And loading dies for Wild Cat cartridges and improved cartridges and whatnot are available from RCBS. They're available from Redding. They're available from Hornady. And, Redding and Hornady will make you some custom dies. Only listed calibers from RCBS are available. At one time, you used to be able to get almost anything you wanted. They quit that a number of years ago. Only listed cartridges for these odd situations is what's available from RCBS. So you've got really quite an advantage there, and it's really wonderful that these various entities have offered this opportunity so that you can load ammunition for some of these things. You can design around yourself. You can go to one or two of these entities, Hornady or Redding, have them make you custom dies by sending you some fired cases and so forth, and maybe some other information that they might request from you, and you're pretty well home free. But it's always been this question, just keeps coming back: how do I know what to load? Well, that's what you have to do.